So yes, hi, as Jen said, I am Shamila Ahmed. I'm the Managing Director of an organisation called Resilience Learning Partnership. And if you came along to the launch event, you would have heard a lot about us and what we do and how we do it. Today, I want to talk to you about, I suppose, how we've got to where we've got to in this case study. This is a bit of a different case study for me. Anybody who's ever been at our trauma training or any of our sessions will have experienced quite a different case study. This is much more like your classic, typical case study. And I want to take you through where RLP has come from and where it has got to and how we've got there. So we've got a bit of a timeline to go through that I want to show you of some really significant stuff I think has been key in our development. Some factors to consider, internal factors that really mattered and external factors that really mattered and made the stars align, as some like to say. And then I want us to very quickly, because I know we don't have a lot of time today, to deep dive into one aspect of those factors that I think is really, really important. And that's around strategy and the strategic spaces that RLP has that we occupy currently, and how we got to there and the importance of them. And if we have time, which we very might well, thank you, Jennifer. The teacher in me has a little something at the end that's just some tips, some places to think about of where to start, because I know everybody here today will be at varying degrees of their journey and starting to become trauma informed and implementing trauma informed practice within your organisation, within your team, and then looking to embed lived experience, because we can never get away from, if it cannot be trauma informed unless it is informed by those with lived experience of trauma. So lived experience and trauma informed practice go hand in hand. The lived experience is one of the pillars that holds trauma informed practice up. So right into this timeline. So very quickly, for anyone who's never heard of Resilience Learning Partnership, and this is the first time, we're a training and education provider with a bit of a dual purpose, we like to say. We operate in learning, development, educational spaces, supporting organisations and local government and everything in between. However, the duality comes in how we do what we do. 95% of our workforce has lived experience of complex trauma, which means they have a lived experience of many different aspects of the services that are within Scottish society. So in 2018, I met a wonderful man called Richard Thompson, who was the Community Justice Coordinator, Policy Coordinator, sorry, at Clackmannanshire Council. And he talked of an idea, the seed of an idea, and that led to around 50 of us coming together in June 2018 in the Alloa Town Hall for a concept meeting. There was about 50 of us, I think, in total. And by the end of that meeting, about half of the room thought this idea of an entity, an organisation that could support people with lived experience to input in a way that hadn't really been done before, input in a much more supported and learning and development focused way, and actually, really importantly as well, be paid for their contributions to policy development, service design, training, things like that. And about half of the room thought it would work, and about half of the room thought it wouldn't. And then by the end of that, trawling through those people, we were left with about 5 or 6 individuals who actually really did believe and were willing to commit and put themselves forward as board members to take this idea forward. So that's how we began. It was me trying to take this thing forward with a small board of 4 people. And in September 2018, we became incorporated. Things started moving relatively quickly then, but it was still me doing this work. But through the people on our board and the networks and connections that were being developed, I was introduced to NHS Education for Scotland, as well as Scottish Government, and a phenomenal relationship started developing there around this concept of lived experience, giving in more of a way than had been previously happening. that took off very, very quickly. And with the launch of the national framework the previous year, that year, the National Trauma Training Plan came out. I was invited to be part of the development of that resource, and we became a co-author of it in the process. A lot of media attention came with that, and we featured on BBC News, ITV News. We secured our first big bit of funding in 2019 from the National Lottery, who are great supporters of lived experience work, particularly over the past few years. We spoke at a Clackmannanshire TEDx event, which was a phenomenal achievement for the area of Clackmannanshire to have a TEDx event and to be able to speak at that about trauma-informed practice, about the impact that it makes, and about the work that RLP was trying to do was we shot up quite quickly after that. Our profile went up rather quickly. 2020, as you will all be very aware, a global pandemic hit, and before that we were still working away. I had then managed to convince someone else to come in and work alongside me, my colleague Melanie, who was actually the Violence Against Women and Girls coordinator and within Clackmannanshire for a period of time, and allowed us to start building a bit more. Anyone here who's ever worked on their own will appreciate, you can't do it all on your own, and to start to build a bit of a team around myself was absolutely vital. As you can see, in 2020, an awful lot of funding came in. We greatly benefited, actually, in a lot of ways from the pandemic. I know it's been exceptionally difficult for a lot of people, but we often say now at RLP, there's nothing like a lifetime of trauma and adversity to prepare you for a global pandemic, and that's really what happened. Once we were able to plug into the supports and networks around us as a small organisation, we were able to really thrive during some of the kind of most difficult times. And as you see, the funding really helped us as resource, and the team grew exceptionally quick and big. During 2020, we went from 2 people to we're now at 15. 2021, the success really did continue in regards to securing funding. We were able to demonstrate what we were doing. We were able to show that we were having an impact, that it was working, that we were aligning ourselves with a lot of stuff that was going on in Scotland. So the Promise, I was part of the review process, and we managed to secure some funding from the Promise to work within our own organisation, actually, to ensure that our own policies were in line with everything that was coming out from the Promise. We also were awarded continuous funding, 3 years funding. Our first year's funding in 2021 for our tier pathway, but the following year we then secured 3 years continuous funding, which everyone in this space will know is vital in a project like tier. Tier stands for Trauma Informed Education and Recruitment, and I suppose it's ultimately an employability pathway for individuals who have lived experience of complex trauma, and it's helping them discover their ambition, their aspiration for the future, in a very trauma-informed way, and considering all of the barriers that they may experience. So that's been exceptionally successful, that pathway, and we're so excited and grateful to have continued funding for it. One of the other things that's happened in 2021 is we really discovered an ability to create different mechanisms to share some of what we're doing, the voice of people with lived experience, examples of the work that we're doing, and we've found really creative ways of doing that. We've been working with an amazing filmmaker who has helped us create film resources and audio resources. We also had a brand overhaul and changed our brand because we discovered that it perhaps wasn't very accessible. You can see the old logo there at the top of the timeline, and the new one at the bottom. That was done after we brought in an external consultant to strategically analyse the organisation. We could see we were doing well, everything that was happening. You can see this is a timeline of lots of successes. Of course, there's bumps in the road along the way, but a lot of success was happening, and we wanted to understand why. We wanted to understand what it was that we were doing that was good, and pull out the really good stuff. So we brought in the amazing Emma McGregor, who helped us look at what we were doing and pull out the real the strategic aspects of it, like any other organisation would do. And we launched our very first strategic plan for a 3-year period. This year, we are really moving into I suppose, a stabilisation phase. There's been so much growth very quickly. There's been so much success. We don't want to diminish that in any way, but we want to make sure we can make it sustainable. We are doing something right here at RLP, and we want to make sure that leaves a legacy and is around for as long as possible. So pulling out our vision, our mission, our priorities and commitments were exceptionally important, and we're in the phase of really starting to settle into them. Staff are getting used to success measures and what that looks like practically, how we make sure we never stray from ensuring that those success measures and what we are capturing is trauma informed, and how we do it is trauma informed, that the people we are working with don't become test subjects or research, but they are actually part of how we are evaluating. And we're doing some really cool stuff that maybe you'll hear more about in 3 years' time in our next strategic document. Another wee thing I wanted to highlight was actually the support that we've had as well, and I'll talk more about that on my next slide. But in 2020, we got our first commendation in Parliament, and then we did again this year, which was absolutely lovely, and really tells the staff and shows the staff that they're valued and appreciated for what they are doing. So just wanted to highlight that for us that's a huge achievement, and something that we didn't ever expect. So how did we get here? We don't have a lot of time today to really delve in, but I thought, a wee slide on what I think has been really fundamental. There's internal factors, of course, and there's external. So I think one of the main things is that we were lived experience led from the outset, from inception. It could never have been any other way. And Richard Thompson was as fundamental in that than I was. It wasn't, a battle of any kind at all, and it was never in question. That doesn't mean all organisations need to be lived experience led. That's not what I'm saying. However, when you're doing stuff like this, when you really want to embed lived experience, it should be lived experience led. So that can be a project, that can be an initiative. It doesn't need to be the whole thing. And like Jen said, this is about us all coming together. But I think what is different is that lived experience is now being included in a way that it never has been before. And it's being included in a way that things like research are included. It's been held up in the same way and should be given an equal footing around the table. And that's where co-production and co-design comes in, because that's what true co-production is. It's everyone around the table as equals. It doesn't mean everybody's doing an equal amount of practical work. That's actually not possible. We know that through other collaborative ways of working. But co-production is about us all being seen and treated and feeling like we're equals around the table. And that can be quite hard to create if you've got lots of different power imbalances around a table. Like people not getting paid is just one little example of how that might manifest. Individuals are exceptionally important. So the who in the recipe we're starting to call this, that's what proper co-production and collaboration is. It's like a recipe. You need key ingredients, you need key people, and not just people with certain skills, professional skills and qualities, which are important and needed, but you need people with actual certain personality traits, certain human qualities, certain values, a certain value base. These are all very, very important when you're bringing together a team of people to do something like a lived experience piece of work, because it should have a co-production approach always. Leadership has been exceptionally important and is very important in the quest for trauma-informed practice in Scotland, regardless But in projects like this as well, leadership is exceptionally important, and the leadership that I benefited from and my board was very, very important. They believed in me, they believed in this, and that was always really, really evident and really, really helped. They were also always very accessible and very visible to me, which is an essential quality in trauma-informed leadership. We were working from a solid evidence base. So trauma-informed practice, the evidence that surrounds that and holds it up. And again, you know, the thing I said at the beginning, it cannot be trauma-informed unless it is informed by those with lived experience of trauma. And having that as the foundation of what we were doing has served us exceptionally well. No one can argue with it. We are here at the table with solid evidence showing that this is how this needs to be done and that it works and has great impact. In a strategic approach, I didn't realise how strategic I was or how strategic a mind I had until Resilience Learning Partnership. It wasn't even something I discovered about myself when I was at university. However, running this organisation has helped me understand how I am very strategic and probably have been most of my life, but I would have used this different language to explain that. The external factors are just as important as the internal factors. I feel you couldn't have one without the other. It's so intertwined. Starting with leadership, the leadership outside of RLP that we were able to access, the people that have mentored and nurtured me and supported me, the people who have opened doors for us, and welcomed us in and held a mirror up to themselves in the process and how they work and how they are doing this work and making changes along the way, live as the work's happening. Very inspiring and somewhere where we at RLP as well can learn from the leadership. So leadership has nurtured us. You know, the leadership external to RLP itself has had a great hand in getting us to where we are. And that's people from NHS Education for Scotland, it's people from local government, national government, it's people from leaders from third sector organisations who are some of my greatest mentors and who have paved the way for us to come and do what we are doing. A whole load of support and hope and belief in the leadership that's surrounded us. Strategic spaces, and this is the one area I'm going to focus on in the next slide and deep dive into, but exceptionally important in the strategic spaces that we've then gone on to occupy, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. The introduction of trauma-informed practice in Scotland and the scientific evidence that holds that up. And Scotland really beginning to see the impact of trauma on its nation and what that looks like in the criminal justice system and domestic abuse, where we have horrific figures, within drug deaths, within the care sector, young people who are wrapped up in our care system. Scotland's eyes are beginning to open and we're beginning to look at all of those really complex issues in a very, very different way. And it is really down to us beginning to understand trauma and its impact. There's an appetite for change. I think Jen's really highlighted that. There's been an appetite for change, I think, for quite some time in Scotland. Things like the Independent Care Review and the Promise, the creation of things like Community Justice Scotland, the redress scheme that's coming out from the review, the growth of the violence against women and girls agenda, and local authorities really starting to kind of hone in on that. I think these have all contributed to us being in, again, the stars aligning, being in the right place at the right time, coming along just when we were needed, I suppose. And then there is also the aspect of the lived experience movement growing more generally across the UK. I think the lottery shows that, and how they are beginning to fund Life Changes Trust as well, which has just come to an end after a 10-year funding period. Also discovered that and their learnings and findings over the past 10 years, they've released a load of amazing reports that talk about things like relational funding, where the sector needs to go. And there's just a real growing movement across the UK. The Leaders with Lived Experience Fund that the lottery distributes is an exceptional fund. We've benefited from that for this past year, and so have over 50 other organisations across the UK. So this is really, really, really growing, and I think something to really keep an eye on. So I wanted to deep dive into one section, which is strategy. And I know they say culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it does usually. However, for an organisation like RLP that's just beginning, that's just starting, that's I suppose creating itself in the same guise that many other organisations currently exist in, but it has this lived experience led ethos right from the beginning, right from the start. Occupying and getting into these strategic spaces has been absolutely vital in us developing ourselves and learning what we need to be, what it is that really needs to happen in Scotland in regards to lived experience and how we start to fit into that. And for me, as the leader of this organisation, that sat in learning and development, actually the learning and development of staff across the public and third sector, and where we can, the private sector, the whole workforce. And getting into these spaces has allowed us to embed ourselves actually into the systems. So I've kind of themed them here, but you'll see there's a hell of a lot, and the L means local, N means national. But we've got the Violence Against Women and Girls Partnership in our own locality. We're also part of the Violence Against Women and Girls National Network. We're also part of the local period poverty group. All essential spaces to be in regards to violence against women and girls, both locally and nationally, from our perspective. We also are in the public protection, learning and development subgroup. That again, like the previous ones, are actually, that is really down to leadership. One exceptional leader who knew we should be at that space, who thought that it was important that we contributed and welcomed us in. And we've been on the subgroup now for a good couple of years, maybe 2.5 years. And that is vital for us understanding how the inner workings of local authorities work in regards to things like public protection and safeguarding and child and adult protection, and how that all gets sucked up through learning and development and then kind of spewed out, sorry for the crass language, into a community. And then we would then see that on the kind of the end of people being in the care system or in the criminal justice system and all of that. And I think this space, I'm highlighting it specifically because no one else like us is in that space. It's all local authorities, staff. It's 2 local authorities together, Stirling and Clackmannanshire. And then there is one representative for the whole third sector and voluntary sector that attends that meeting. And I think the fact that we go there as autonomous and an independent organisation that represents lived experience speaks volumes to the fact that we're not being scooped under the umbrella of the whole third sector, because I think that's one of the other things about lived experience is we're having a bit of an emergence of a subsector of sorts, let's just say. So I just think it's really, really important to highlight the different kind of spaces that we can sit on, public protection being one. We also sit in our local community justice partnership as well as the alcohol and drug partnership. Those 2 were harder to get onto and took longer, but again, I can say wholeheartedly, has come down to leadership. That was the issue of getting onto it beforehand. We weren't. I don't think we hadn't earned enough stripes yet. Some changes in leadership, some shifting around, and now we are welcomed with open arms, and that's fantastic. But yeah, some learning and what it took to get us there. I sit on the academic advisory group for Community Justice Scotland. Again, I feel like the least academic or experienced in that space. However, when I'm in it, I feel just as valued, equal, and listened to as any one of the other people on it. That's about me, and not about the space. But again, just to highlight a really different space, I think, for an organisation like Resilience Learning Partnership to sit on. We also sit on, which is just a very new advisory group created at national government level by Chief Social Work's Office, Trauma Informed Social Work Advisory Group. I sit on the Survivors of Childhood Abuse Fund panel. These are all national, huge kind of groups that oversee huge pieces of work. We sit on Strive, which is the Safeguarding Through Rapid Intervention initiative that sits in Clackmannanshire. I think that was talked about actually and commended in Parliament and maybe held up as a national model, but again, quite a different space for an organisation like ours to sit on. Again, we were welcomed into that space by the leadership who thought it was really important an organisation like ours was a route for people before child protection or children being removed or custody or charges and things like that. So really great for us to be in that space, working in a preventative way. We're part of the Promise mobilisation team in our local authority. Another thing that we sit in and with and alongside is STILT. So we deliver a half-hour slot of the National Scottish Trauma-Informed Leaders training every quarter alongside colleagues at NES. And then we also I sit as part of, although I'm not an actual champion because I don't work for a big national organisation like a local authority or an NHS board, but I plug into the national local trauma champion groups here in Forth Valley as well as nationally. And then also sit on the National Suicide Prevention Lived Experience panel and the Each and Every Child initiative, which is the Reframing Care Experience initiative that's currently sitting with Robertson's Trust in Scotland. That isn't even all of the strategic spaces that we sit on. I didn't have enough room and I didn't want to overwhelm the session with it, but that's just a highlight of some of the most prominent spaces that we sit in. And I really do believe that this has been key to our success, to our development. For us, as much as kind of the outwardly thing that we do, for us as individuals with lived experience, beginning to understand the legislation, the systems, all of that are created for that often the benefit of us, beginning to understand them more, how they actually operate, the constraints, the challenges, the limitations with things, especially like legislation and the law, and how we can begin to take a trauma-informed into them and think about them in a bit of a different way by having lived experience voice embedded throughout. So I don't know how I'm doing for time. I don't think I've got a lot of time to spend with you. I just seen Jen's face popping up there, which might be an indication that I'm running over. But the kind of teacher in me cannot leave you without giving you a wee bit of something, and it's just about where do you start with this. So take a trauma-informed, assets-based community development approach. If you do that, you will find skills, gifts and talents that you didn't even realise were there, and the people you find them in might not have either. Always take a co-production approach as well, because essentially it's about being equals around the table. Don't forget that about co-production. Take your time as well. These things take time. Projects like this cannot be rushed. And that's where leadership comes in. Leadership needs to understand that work like this takes time, and we need to resource for that. Dovetails nicely into project plans, budget lines. I'll not ever stop saying this. Budget lines shouldn't be agreed before any work begins. Lived experience work should be its own budget column from now on, its own column in your action plan and your programme of work. You can no longer get away from it. If you're wanting to do trauma-informed stuff, then you're going to have that column in there. Who are your ingredients? Don't forget the importance of human beings in this. This is what we do. We work with humans, not physical materials or products. We work with people. So who are the people that are doing this work for you? Are they the right people? Do you need other people? Don't be afraid to explore that. Scoping, ask lots and lots of questions. Please be curious about this and ask lots of questions before you begin. Find allies and others who you know are doing this type of work just now. Come together, collaborate, co-produce. You have strength in that. You have strength in organisational numbers and people and resources and capacity if you club together and truly collaborate on this. And don't be afraid of the mess. One of my greatest mentors told me that in lived experience work, if it's getting messy, then you're doing it right. So don't be afraid of that. And if you are a bit afraid of mess, because I understand some people need things really ordered, get some people in around you who aren't afraid of the mess. Don't mind getting a wee bit dirty, and I'm up for staying around until things get ordered and clean again. And I just wanted to include this wee quote. It's often said by my phenomenal colleague Caroline Bruce, and John Carnochan says it as well. But start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. The will to do this and do it right is actually one of the most important things in the foundation that you need to start with. A lot of this is about changing how we think rather than what we do. We already do a lot of good stuff. And there you go. That's me finished. Just some wee resources that I think that help anybody beginning their journey on this, especially that book Beyond Sticky Notes. It's absolutely phenomenal, and it helps you start to put together your recipe for proper lived experience co-production.